Hello, folks. We are just waiting for my partner in crime to join up, so just give it a second. There he is.
There we are.
How's it going?
Not bad, man. How are you?
Good, good.
Shall we?
Sorry, that took us. We're still figuring out the ins and outs of making this all work on Instagram, but we have lifted off now.
Okay, right on. Well, let's kick it right off. Welcome, everybody, to Safe Space for White Questions, Instagram attempt number 2. This week, or this month, rather, we've got obviously, we're not specifically doing a themed issue, but it makes sense to us that a lot of you are thinking about, I'm being told that people can't hear me.
Oh, I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Hear you fine, yeah.
People who are listening and also able to text me, can you hear me now? Or maybe people can do some kind of like thumbs up thing if they can hear me talking. Okay. Yeah, all right, people can hear. That must just be that one person couldn't hear. Okay. Thank you. Wow, look how people can... I see why people like this platform. Anyway, we're broadcasting to you from Chibuktuk, unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq Nation and Mi'kmaq people, where we are learning how to be immigrants to Mi'kmaqi. It's a constant, ongoing process of learning. And this month, obviously, many of you are thinking about Palestine and Israel. We see that in the questions that we've gotten today. So we're going to take the questions and go as long as we can. We got to tune out a little bit early today, but we still have a good 45 minutes before we got to go. So my name is Ajay Parasram. I work at Dalhousie University. And yeah, I've been doing the show for a long time with Alex. I'm going to pass it over to Alex. He'll tell you about himself, and then we're going to jump right into your questions.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, AJ. My name is Alex Khasnabish. I am the other half of Safe Space for White Questions. Happy to be here with you folks, broadcasting live Instagram from Chibuktuk. Also occupied territory, which we're going to be talking about today. And yeah, I labor for a wage at Saint Vincent University, which I'll add at the end there. But yeah, so happy to be here with you all today. Take it right back to AJ, who's going to lead us off this month.
All right. So the first question: can states commit terrorism, or is terrorism only something that non-states engage in? What exactly is terrorism, and how is it different from state violence? I understand that Israel has the right to defend itself, but does that include cutting off power to hospitals and supplies of food and water and medicine? Really important question that gets kind of right to the heart of everything, all in one go. So thank you for that question. Terrorism, if you want to get technical about terrorism, there's a wonderful article called Territory by Barry Hindess. Came out in 2006, and in it he offers a potential etymology of the word terrorism that comes from the Latin root word terrere, to frighten, and specifically to frighten off of a particular territory. So there's something, I think, that gets right at the heart of the word terrorism to territory that we should always kind of start by taking note of. That said, to the definition I offer to my students usually in class is that terrorism is the strategic use of violence, often against civilian or non-military populations, in order to achieve a specific political objective. And I think that's a useful definition because there's nothing inherently prescriptive about it. It is a thing that somebody engages in. It is not a state of being, not a state of existence. And to the question about can states commit terrorism, I mean, I think you're putting your finger on something really important here, which is that in the last 150 years of the community of states and the international system, there's generally been this belief that states are inherently moral actors, that states are, that, when states act, they have the collective interests of all of its people, at least in mind. And I think that, we have reason to doubt that. Certainly I do. Like most of my research is about colonial state formation. So there's a lot of problems to be had with the idea that, that states are moral actors. So to my mind, yes, of course, by that definition of the strategic use of violence to achieve a political objective, states do that. Like I think that Israel, for example, is obviously doing that, using overwhelming violence in a contained geographical region to achieve a particular objective, one that they're not been totally clear about, but I think you can piece together from the things that they've been saying. It sounds like, they've ordered people out of Gaza City and pushed everybody into the south. There's a very strategic project that they're engaging with, and that Western countries, and not just Western countries, also countries like India, countries that have a vested interest in settler colonialism are very much supporting. And to your question about the strategic use of cutting off power to hospitals, supplies of food and water and medicine, these are things that the international community has already identified, from 10 days ago almost, that they will be looking into this as crimes against humanity on both the side of Hamas as well as on the side of Israel. But I think we have to be cognizant about creating these things as equivalents. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. I'll pass it to Alex for a little more on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good and important question. As somebody who studies social movement and like non-elite, sort of non-conventional forms of social change, I'm really very confident saying that I think it's a very arbitrary distinction between this whole notion that we somehow have a legitimate monopolization of violence and that other people do not. I in no way want to live in a world where the use of violence is generalized and accepted as a mode of settling conflict. I want to be clear about that, right? I say that as somebody who enjoys and practices kind of obsessively martial arts, right? And the thing that always strikes me about some of my friends and comrades in class, if we get to talking after class, this is that people who are regularly exposed to that kind of violence, in a class setting, want nothing to do with it on the street. There's no bluster. My very well established fellow grapplers, fighters, they're like, somebody's tried to start something in my street, the first thing I do is run away. I've no, not because they're necessarily terrified, simply because bring that kind of violence into the world and you don't know what's going to happen next, right? So both for you and for someone else. So that's kind of just a lived reality, that violence should not be our first, our second, our recourse. That said, let's keep in mind that this whole mythology around the modern rule of law, nation states, if we listen to great pundits of liberal democracy on the radio or now, you would think that states basically made the world. Well, then try to square the circle of how the 20th century ends up being the most violent century in human history, not by a little bit, not by degrees, but by orders of magnitude. You don't get the industrial slaughter of the First and Second World Wars, for example, without nation states. You don't get bombing of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos without nation states. You don't get the mobilization of millions, mostly of young men, but not only, in their bodies, their lives wasted on the battlefield without nation states. And let's keep in mind that most of those wars, we love to think about World War II as the good war, right? As the war that we really fought against fascism. I mean, I have so much to say about that, including the fact that none of that settled the fascist tendencies in any countries that the Allies. But outside of that, that war, as necessary as it may have been in order to defeat the Nazi threat, like was industrial slaughter on a like a scale almost right. So none of these things are without states. How can we distinguish the carpet bombing of Dresden or the bombing of London, which are both intentionally targeted civilian populations during World War II, from terrorism? Let's say the use of a car bomb to blow up a neighborhood, right? We say one is legitimate because it's been carried out by a national government. The other one isn't because it's carried out by people organized in a different way. I think that's inherently an unstable and certainly an amoral distinction. We can parse the realpolitik of this all we want. And if you are a person who's like, I'm content to live and die in a world awash in violence, then okay. But your bluster aside, how would you feel if somebody kicked down your door tonight and, like enacted terrible violence? And like nobody wants to live this way, right? Even professional fighters don't want to live in a world where they're constantly having to be the biggest dog and protect themselves against violence, right? Nobody, that's why we arguably create societies to begin with. And yet, ironically, on the other side of it, we have the greatest mobilization of violence, the greatest capacity to do so, and also the greatest distance from most of us who are actually contributing to that violence in very indirect ways through tax dollars and all these kinds of things. And then mobilize those resources taken from us and mobilize not to build hospitals, not to settle conflict in the world, not to save endangered species, not to protect the environment, but to build munitions that are increasingly sophisticated and leave us at ever greater degrees of remoteness from the consequences of those acts. So I think it's really important to distinguish, right? We're reading a lot right now about the atrocities committed by Hamas, and they are atrocities. I would agree with that. I think, like the targeting of civilians is something that always is awful and breaks my heart. I'm not going to, sort of lament this too much, but you get what I'm saying, okay? At the same time, dropping a bomb or firing a guided missile or using a drone to go into a neighborhood and blow up something is no less of an act of terror than shooting into a music concert where people are having fun. Like they're both civilian infrastructures, right? And we can argue about like, Hamas engaged in the incursion first. That's true if you want to imagine that the conflict began at the beginning of October rather than, decades or perhaps centuries before and has this kind of history. So yeah, violence is deplorable. It's deplorable on both sides, but we have to recognize that this does not come from nowhere. And yeah, I certainly think that the terrorism distinction is an arbitrary one used to uphold the right of states to monopolize violence, as we've seen with Black Lives Matter and Idle No More. States regularly use violence against all kinds of people who are certainly not deserving of it. So yeah, over to you, AJ.
Thanks for that, Alex. And we got two live questions that just popped up, and they're kind of related. So I'm going to read them together and we'll take them together. So the first question is, interested to hear your thoughts on Hamas. Everyone seems to be condemning them, saying they're evil, etc. But isn't Hamas the one group actively doing something for Palestinian liberation? Are they as bad as everyone says, or is that just white settler colonialism talking? And the related question that came through live is, why doesn't Hamas try to build a better society within Gaza? And why do they tell their citizens to stay in place when Israel warns that it's going to be bombed? So really important questions. And I really have to preface the first thing by saying, Alex and I always say, like, we're not necessarily area experts. In this case, we are really not area experts in Israel and Palestine. In my case, I study colonialism, like I mentioned, and colonial state formation. This conflict is something that, you know, many of us were raised around, like studying and talking about. Mostly, in my case, through my dad, because he was a journalist, a third world journalist. So I am not suited to be able to give you a domestic political analysis of Hamas. But there are lots of really great people who can do that work. Mark Ayash in Alberta is a really great source for that, as well as there's a wonderful book that I did have the privilege of reviewing called Decolonizing Palestine by my colleague Somdeep Sen, who's based in Norway, I believe. That said, let me take an attempt at answering your question. You know, Hamas was, like many other organizations, it started as more of a grassroots organization. They actually contested elections in 2006 and won those elections. So, you know, you got to always think about, like, the way people talk about democratic peace theory and, you know, like, we really just need to protect democracy. So they did win an election. That said, there's a lot of criticism about Hamas, both internal in Palestine and externally, obviously. And I think it's important to note that the structure within which any Palestinian government has to operate is not a normal structure by any stretch of the imagination. To not have control over your ports, to not have control over when someone's shutting off the power and that sort of thing. I think especially for folks you know, living in Canada, unless you're indigenous, you probably don't have a context through which to understand what that is like. And so none of that is to excuse, like Alex says, you know, violence against civilians is a terrible thing, and nobody wants to see civilians get hurt. But you have to think about the structural context within which people are forced to act. Now, you know, in the book Decolonizing Palestine, for example, that Professor Sen wrote, there's accounts of Palestinian people talking about what their criticisms of Hamas are and how it operates. The idea that oftentimes violence might be used against Palestinians themselves. But these are also internal discussions that Palestinians have a right to have amongst themselves about how they're governed within the confines of their struggle. And I don't think that it's my place or anyone else's place to dictate the terms of acceptability, you know, from the comfortable vantage point of settler colonial Nova Scotia. So I don't know that that fully answers your questions about Hamas trying to build a better society. And, you know, like, people will try, and they have been doing. And I think that the continued resilience of the Palestinian people after, you know, some 80 years of concerted state violence against them is nothing short of incredible. And I think it's one of the reasons why the Palestinian struggle speaks to oppressed people all over the world. That's just a simple fact. That level of resiliency is something that probably not a lot of people would ever be able to kind of come back from. And yet Palestinians all the time not only come back, but also are educating the world, I think, about how to do this under impossible circumstances. So yeah, I mean, I guess to some extent, I don't think it's even that important to think about whether or not Hamas is good or bad. Hamas is an institution in that situation, and the situation that gave rise to Hamas is not entirely an internal situation. So focus less about what is and is not bad, and focus more on the structure that continues the system going the way that it is. Alex?
Yeah, a great response, AJ. I mean, really, like, I just have a couple of things I would add to this. With respect to that second question, why doesn't Hamas try to build a better society within Gaza, and why do they tell their citizens to stay in places Israel warns will be bombed? I think this is a very layered and important question. So I think on the one hand, there's, like, at the surface level, it's true, right? So you have civilians in one of the most densely populated places on earth, who, yes, to give the IDF credit, like they're dropping leaflets, they're sending cell phone messages, all those kinds of things. Of course, let's keep in mind they're dropping leaflets and sending cell phone messages like 2 weeks now after they've cut off like electricity, fuel, food, water, medicine. So does anybody have, who's charging their cell phone, right? Like, how are you getting notices that this or that building is going to be bombed? So like, you know, I'm not trying to throw more shade on Israel than is necessary here, but I think, you know, asking these kinds of good faith questions, when I teach my classes at the university about civil disobedience, for example, so this is like the disobedience that people, this is the kind of protest that like middle class, like liberal people tend to like best, right? It's like that form of disobedience that illustrates the moral unjustness of a situation, right? Think about lunch counter sit-ins or, you know, freedom riders in the 1950s and 60s in the United States, right? These are Black folks and their allies who are sitting in places and engaging in behavior that is technically, in most cases, illegal, as a way of illustrating the unjustness of that situation. And like, you know, white liberals love this shit, frankly. Like, they love the images of this dignified resistance, and I'm sorry to put scare quotes around it, but like Black people being beaten. They were beaten when they sat at these lunch counters. They knew they were going to be beaten. They went through training for this. But to be honest, like, I would not, like, as an individual, if you came to me and said, Alex, you're gonna like have to go out and get your ass beaten regularly in order to demonstrate to the like white folks and the dominant folks around you that this is immoral. If you gave me the chance between that and fighting back, I think I would take the fighting back option. I'm just going to be like, I know that's abstract. That's just, and I'm not saying they're either or. Obviously, the struggle for civil rights in the context of North America, the context of the United States, had many different prongs, right? And some of them were militant and some of them were like very liberal. And it took all of that to make change. But what I'm pointing out is that it is like, it's a really big problem, as AJ's been pointing out, to try and adjudicate morality of life and death struggles from the outside when you have no context and you have no lived experience of that. So, you know, like Canadians get all up in arms every time an indigenous nation blockades a railway or a roadway, right? They're like, how dare you? We have rule of law in this country, right? Yeah, well then how do you square that circle that all of Nova Scotia is unceded indigenous territory? There are no treaties that ceded this territory to the people who currently claim political sovereignty over it. So that's occupation. That's what we mean, but that's regarded as an international crime, right? States aren't allowed to do that. Oh, Canada conveniently dodges that, right? We dodge that. Oh, nobody was here. It was terra nullius. It was no person. Oh, really? Like, and then how did those settlers survive? What about all the rich histories of settlers? Anyway, like, we could go on and on. In any case, like, all these fictions are like Russian nesting dolls, right? We take one, we're like, oh, bad terrorists. Oh, wait a second. What about the fact that states mobilize violence all the time? Like, okay, cluster munitions are banned internationally because they are indiscriminate weapons. What did the United States just send to Ukraine a few months ago? They sent them cluster bombs to use in their war against Russia. That like the use of those weapons is a war crime, right? So, oh, we can say, well, no, we don't like Putin. He's an authoritarian, right? So does that mean like anything goes when we're fighting certain kinds of wars? Isn't that a convenient justification? So in the same way, it's easy to vilify our opponents in moments, or the people we imagine to be our opponents, the people we're taught to fear and hate. In the context of the Palestinian struggle, we have to remember what's going on, just like in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, is a dramatically asymmetrical war. On the one hand, on the one side, you have one of the most modern, well-armed militaries in the world. The IDF is a totally top-notch fighting force. On the other hand, you have a people who have been denied any right to social, political, or economic development for the last nearly 100 years, and who have been systematically subject to deprivation, genocide, and political neutering, right? So how exactly are they supposed to make their case heard, right? How are they supposed to mobilize force to compel Israel to stop occupying land? The disappearance of Palestine is what we're talking about here. And to your question, and this is just where I'll leave it, I'll say, yeah, I think it's a difficult thing to adjudicate this whole civilian issue. I would say Israel has told Palestinians to basically move out of the northern part of the Gaza Strip. If everybody leaves and the IDF occupies and like bombs the shit out of it, which they're doing right now, and Palestinians aren't allowed to come back, that is yet more Palestinian land. Like Gaza Strip is tiny, right? It's tiny. It's nothing. It's going to be even less than that. In addition to the ongoing illegal settlements that are expanding in the West Bank, which is the only other part of this so-called Palestinian state that might ever exist. This is literally the disappearance of the possibility of Palestine ever existing. So just like indigenous people in North America who refuse, in so-called North American, Turtle Island, elsewhere, who refuse to cede their territory, their identity, their connections, their relationships to other humans and non-human life, because they regard that as the foundational point of their existence, even up to the point of their physical lives being endangered by that. That is the existential struggle we're dealing with. So like for you, for people to kind of pose that question in that way, well, why don't they just leave? Why don't they just go? First of all, where are they supposed to go? Israel controls all the borders to Gaza and all the borders to the West Bank, right? Second, if they leave and that territory is gone and occupied by Israel, isn't that just a way of this creeping kind of disappearance of any possibility of political autonomy, which is precisely what this conflict is about right now? So yeah, to our eyes, it can look brutal, right? And I'm not defending Hamas. I'm not gonna back Hamas in terms of its military strategy or any of its actions. You're not gonna get that from me. But I do understand that domination and occupation breeds resistance, and the forms of resistance it often breeds are like a mirrored version of the brutality of the occupation itself. It's like if you saw me rant about the Haitian Revolution on our show like a year ago now. Yeah, there were atrocities committed by like enslaved people freeing themselves and fighting back against people who were desperately trying to keep them as property. Do I endorse that? No, of course not. Can I understand it and contextualize it? Yeah. And yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there. AJ?
All right, thanks for that. The next question we have, you guys aren't taking it easy on us. Are Palestinians indigenous to Palestine? Are Israelis indigenous to Israel? I heard that the British caused this conflict a long time ago. Is that true? A lot to unpack there. To some extent, the first thing I'll say is that the British were involved, and that should come as a surprise to no one. That empire is and the rise of the modern nation system of states in the 19th century has a lot of blood on its hands, especially in terms of creating what we call like kind of categories and containers of nation states that we have since imagined and cast backwards in time to be ethnically pure places, which was never actually the case. So to my mind, ask indigenous people and maybe they'll have a different perspective. To me, I don't think that the question of understanding this issue really is about indigeneity necessarily. I do think that Palestinians have a claim to indigeneity. And I do obviously accept that, Jewish people, which is not the same as an ethnicity, that's a religion. So, don't conflate the terms here. Jewish people obviously were in the lands of Judea for thousands of years. And we can't the way that religion and ethnicity and race gets all mixed up together when we talk about these things, we have to kind of separate them a little bit. So, obviously, there were no Muslims or Christians around in the early days of Jewish settlement in that geographical region because those religions did not exist. But does that mean that the people who would later become, Muslims and Christians and whatnot did not exist? Obviously they existed. And I think that there's some clear parallels between what happens here and in places like in India, for example. India right now, is being led by a kind of Hindu supremacist state that wants to imagine ahistorically, backwards in time, that India has always been like the national homeland for Hindus, which is completely untrue. Obviously, Hindus have always lived there. Obviously, there is always a historical Jewish presence, but then that did not exclude the presence of the rise and arrival of other people. And then, you know, the 400 years, you know, I think it's true. We have to note, like, that Jews were taken out of this territory against their will. That's a historical fact. And then a really long time passed, and obviously some were still there in small numbers. And then waves of empires, the Ottoman Empire, I guess, in the lead up to World War I, was ruling there. But none of that is about legitimacy. All, like, empires are this abstract level that is completely disconnected from the day-to-day life that people are living in. So we could talk endlessly about origin points, and it's not really about origin points. You have to engage with, like, the material actions of things like, you know, so the Balfour Declaration that the British proclaimed in 1917, that basically accepted the idea that this whole area would become the homeland, in a sense, for Jewish people. That was informed by the kind of well-documented practice of Western European anti-Semitism, right? So I think it's really important to note that, you know, Palestinian people living in their homes were not the people who created the conditions, the horrific conditions of anti-Semitism in Europe, and that gave rise to the Holocaust. That then kind of led to European and Western European descended countries deciding to support this project in a big way. In many ways, I think, to assuage their own feelings of guilt and accountability for what kind of internal to Western European politics and history and anti-Semitism did. But that wasn't on the Palestinian people. That wasn't on indigenous people in that area. And at least from what I've learned, you know, generally speaking, there, before the Nakba, before what the Israelis call the Israeli War of Independence and what Palestinians called the Nakba, the catastrophe, when people went in and just drove Palestinians from their homes and drove them away and seized their homes and, you know, like, did all of these horrible things this is just historical fact. There's nothing opinionated about this happening. Israel does not deny this. That doesn't sound like the actions of indigenous people, at least not the actions of indigenous people, for example, as we have examples for here across Turtle Island. Can you imagine, if you will, if there was an event where indigenous people rose up and just, like, you know, did that in the Canadian context? Like, that's not, like, I'm not here to adjudicate who is and isn't indigenous, but the point I'm trying to make is that nation states are a modern phenomena. They don't have a legitimate history. The nation state as a structure in international politics is related to the rise of the Western European imperialism, particularly in the 19th century, and the creation of states and the imagination that states have to be housed by nations that are somehow ethnically pure has always been a fiction. And it has been a fiction that has been enforced with the violent power of nationalism, particularly in the 20th century and into the 21st century. And this is not just something that we see in Israel and Palestine. We see it in India. We see it in Sri Lanka. We see it across much of the post-colonial world that's now kind of adopting practices of settler colonialism in pursuit of an ahistorical understanding of ethnic purity. So focus on the material practices, focus on the displacement of human beings from their homes and being driven away, if you want to understand the dynamics of this practice, and why people talk about Palestinians obviously having the right to return to their homes. Alex.
Yeah, a really wonderful answer. Again, I just want to add maybe a couple of things from my perspective. I would just double down and say, certainly not my right to adjudicate who is indigenous and not, but Yeah, I would say that there's obviously like an incredibly rich history to this part of the world. What we're talking about in some ways is really the cradle of human society and civilization, you know, stretching back millennia, really. So, you know, we've got a lot of different people who can trace a lot of different traditions, habitation to this area, and I'm certainly not excluding Jewish people from that. But Israel is a modern state, just like Palestine, should it actually be created and recognized as a state amongst others, would now be a modern political state in the tradition of just the last few hundred years. Like states don't have a lifespan beyond that. So no matter how attached we are individually to them, we have to acknowledge that human histories of cohabitation, migration, conflict, negotiation are so much broader than that. And people lived alongside each other for a long time without having these kinds of problems that became weaponized in the context, obviously, of a more modern era. That said, anti-Semitism is definitely at the root of so much of this, but it's not generally an anti-Semitism that is indigenous to the area. It is precisely the fact that Jews were so horribly treated throughout Europe, especially Western Europe, by so many different countries and populations. And indeed, like the story that gets forgotten in this story about the Great War that was World War II was that Canada, the UK, the US, all these places, they didn't want Jewish refugees. They didn't want to help Jews. And in fact, that justification for fighting fascism was only really retroactively applied. I'm not saying that it shouldn't have been done. I'm not saying it's not important, but to say that, I mean, read a book like what is it, the 42 group, I forget the yeah, anyway, wonderful book published by Verso about the history of anti-fascist grassroots organizing in the UK, focusing mainly on this Jewish ex-service person militant organization. It's an amazing history. But one of the things that's so shocking about it is that like this group gets going in London and other places in England in the late 1940s, early 1950s. What has just happened? The fascists have just been defeated. Why are people being forced to organize against fascists who are trying to mobilize anti-Semitic tropes in England? Because generally the ruling class in England, including Churchill and the rest, don't give a shit about Jews and are very public in saying that. If you look back at the time, they Sir Walter Mosley, who is the founding father of British fascism, is like, all the ruling class are wringing their hands because he was in prison, right? Because he was regarded as a Nazi collaborator during the war. He's released afterwards because they're like, oh, what could the harm be? So England as a country is happy to allow fascists, anti-Semites, and a variety of other pro-genocide far-right groups to organize and preach and enact violence on the streets. These Jewish Brits decide to come back, organize, fight back, and ultimately many of them leave and end up in Israel, actually, because they feel they have no home and no political support in England. So that's a story not only about the importance of Israel to modern Jews, but also the total failure of the so-called West to live up to its commitments to democracy, human rights, and justice, and actually confront this pernicious legacy of anti-Semitism that still weaves its way through all our politics. I mean, my goodness, just look at what's going on in the United States right now, right? So we need to keep this in mind, that we can be against anti-Semitism. We can be against occupation strategies. We can be against settler colonialism. We can be against fundamentalist religion. We can be against ethnic nationalism, and hold all these things in our head at the same time. And we can be like fully in support of people's dignity, humanity, and right to exist, and condemn the actions of nation states, which are political entities ruled over in general by a fairly small group of people who are representative of that nation, who get to make the calls. Remember, like for those of us who are looking at Israel right now, right up to the Hamas attack, Israel was a country in the throes of incredible social unrest as the far right coalition government tried to neuter the power of its Supreme Court and introduce all kinds of changes to the democratic nature of Israeli society that was going to make it dramatically less democratic. It was provoking all kinds of Israelis to question whether or not Israel still represents them. So yeah, they can criticize Israel. I can criticize Israel. We can criticize Hamas. We can talk about all of this in context. But what we have to understand is that, like, settler colonialism as a project of putting down your foot somewhere and getting to determine the nature of people's lives in that region, that's not gone well for anyone anywhere. And in fact, you know, like, look at the US's role right now as Israel's biggest ally. I was asked on the radio last week, oh, what about all these international actors, right? What about Hamas being supported by Iran? And I was like, are you kidding? The biggest international actor in the region is the US. The US is halfway around the world. At least Iran is a country in the region. And again, I'm not holding water for the Iranian regime, okay? But the United States regime is totally on board. And the question is, of course, why should the US care so much? Why should it be the biggest interlocutor? What is Israel's relationship to the United States? What is happening, right? We can add so much clarity by asking and answering those questions. Back to you, AJ.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks everyone. You know, we just keep getting, the questions are flooding in. We've only got time, unfortunately, for one more question, and there really are a lot of good ones. I'll just review a couple. People are interested in knowing more about, like, what's happening with NDP MLA Sarah Jama and why this is happening. People are expressing a concern about censorship in this country and elsewhere. And then I think the bigger question, well, they're all big questions, but this one seems really big to me, so I'm going to take this one as our last question. Is it anti-Semitic to single out Israel for criticism? I feel really intimidated to say anything at all about Israel and Palestine, and I'm against the killing of innocent people everywhere, and I don't understand why a country as militarily powerful as Israel gets a free pass to do anything they want with impunity. And there's yet another one that I'm seeing coming in asking about the Iron Dome missile defense system. And so there's a lot. Obviously, I encourage you all to seek out more resources. Fernwood has been publishing lots of books by Palestinians about this conflict, so check out their resources. Independent Jewish Voices is a fantastic resource, and especially on this question of, is it anti-Semitic to single out Israel for criticism? This was, to put this into context, this was a piece of kind of international judicial activism where people set out to create parliamentary working groups in different kind of countries around the world, tasked with trying to convince countries to treat Israel as if it were the collective Jew of the international community. Now, I've been saying earlier that, you know, like, we have to be really careful about trying to ascribe individual personal characteristics to nation states. We should not be doing that. So right off the bat, if you accept the idea that Israel acts as the collective Jew in the international community, then you have to accept then that there are loads of other countries that similarly take up the role of being a religious identity or an ethnic identity. That is simply not what countries are. That's not what states are. So we should be dismissive of that right off the bat. And it is not, what is anti-Semitic is to be racist against Jewish people by virtue of their identification as Jewish. And of course, we are opposed to that, as we are opposed to all forms of racism and transphobia and all of the bad stuff. There can be no compromising about that, and nobody has ever suggested as such. And Independent Jewish Voices has been really strong in terms of pushing to have the Jerusalem Declaration, an alternative phrasing of anti-Semitism that doesn't try to associate it in this way. So there was a really concerted project that has been trying to in like the Canadian Parliament since the Harper days, led by Irwin Cotler, actually, who was a liberal MP, to try to create the kind of legal and parliamentary precedent to do this, as a means, indirect or directly, to silence criticism about Israel. So this is the reason why you're feeling correctly that people are being censored in terms of, or self-censoring, led to self-censor with respect to speaking about fairly obvious empirical occurrences. Academics, physicians have, like lost their jobs, and probably nowhere more than people in Israel are being punished for taking critical stances against what the state of Israel has been doing. And like Alex said in the last question, the domestic politics of Israel was in a state of deep disarray, and war helps to get people on side. And it's just an unfortunate consequence of how international relations works. But all this to say, no, like you should reject the idea that there's legitimacy in ascribing an ethnic purity or an ethnic position to a nation state. You should be deeply historical in terms of describing what is actually happening historically, what's happening right now. And you should be ethically consistent. I think those are all the things you need to do. And for that reason, obviously, no, it is not anti-Semitic to single out a country for the things that they're doing. Just like it's not anti-Hindu to single out the violence that the Indian government is doing against Muslims and Dalits, or anti-Sinhalese to talk about has been happening for 30 years in Sri Lanka. These are things that we absolutely have to do, and we have an ethical and intellectual obligation to talk about this honestly. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, another great response, AJ, for sure. I would actually argue it's anti-Semitic for anybody to suggest that criticism of Israel is beyond the pale. So we can criticize basically every other country, but not Israel because it's the Jewish state. Like that is setting it apart for reasons of like some imagined racial identity. That's like, to me, that's straight, like it's the same thing as, as AJ's kind of already suggested, is painting an entire people, an entire ethnic group, a culture, with the same brush based on the political objectives of its ruling class, which is ridiculous. Like, when people malign Trudeau for the government, for the regime he leads, I don't feel personally attacked by that. I'm not the same thing as Trudeau. I'm not the same thing as the Liberal government of Canada. And in fact, I disagree with a ton of their policies. It's not anti-Canadian for me to criticize that government. It is taking aim, it's actually delivering on the very promise that modernity was supposed to bring us, which was this rational form of discourse where we were allowed to take positions on the positions taken by governments and states ultimately. That is like a step beyond the great chain of being that, Western Europeans lived under pre-modernity, right? Where nobles and the king were simply the agents of God on earth, were different creatures than the rest of us, were beyond criticism and had entitlements and powers the rest of us couldn't even like aspire to or imagine. Everybody who's a defender of the Western tradition, I put that in scare quotes, would agree today that like it's a wonderful thing that we brought that form of unfreedom to its knees, and that we opened, and that the Western European Enlightenment and scientific revolution cleared the field for a rational form of discourse, political power that's transparent, blah, 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 blah. This whole this nonsense celebration of this. Yeah, okay, well, let's look at how actually power is wielded in the modern world. I wish that revolution had been completed instead of us living in this tyranny of corporate capitalism that we've descended into instead. That aside, if you are an adherent of that tradition, like, all the great people who are concerned about free speech and cancel culture and all this stuff today, you should absolutely be convinced that we have not only a right, but a duty to criticize other actors in this international community, not based on some imagined essentialized identity, but based on the shit they do in the world. I don't care how you represent yourself to me in terms of like, your personal ideas about yourself. Like, if you're ever in a job interview, what does HR always say? HR says, don't ask people questions about what they think about themselves. Ask them, when this happened, what did you do? That's how we learn to judge people. Not by what they say, but what they do, right? So in the context of this enduring, untenable, horrible relationship between the Palestinians and Israelis, which, I think everybody agrees is untenable, horrible, all this kind of stuff. What has been going on for the last 17 years since Israel withdrew troops and settlers from Gaza? a collective act of cutting that region off from any ability to develop independently, to exercise political autonomy, to have decent standards of living. That's what's been going. That's what the Jewish state has chosen to do, right? It's got basically all the cards in this game and all the most powerful international allies. So in the face of that, this is the situation that reaches a pressure point and just explodes. And now we have the explosion. We can contextualize the explosion. We don't need to endorse it. I'm not endorsing the murder of civilians when I contextualize that position. But what I would say is that it is a waste of time right now in the face of such an urgent and important crisis, the great revealing, right, of this moment, to be led down a path where we end up engaging in the highly abstract, very moralistic debate around whether it's anti-Semitic to criticize Israel. That's ridiculous, right? It's like, am I anti-English when I criticize England? Am I anti-Indian when I criticize Modi's government in India? Like, no, nobody would even argue that, right? Except for the fundamentalists behind them. So yeah, like I've got to be, I mean, for me, it's not really a problem, but everybody should be careful not to descend into a recapitulation of gross racist tropes, okay? And anti-Semitism provides us, unfortunately, with a wealth of those. Don't do that. And if you are doing that, you should stop immediately. But if what you're doing is demanding a ceasefire, you are horrified at the actions of the IDF, probably as well as the actions of Hamas, then that's not anti-Semitism. That is like a clear-eyed vision of trying to make a dignified, peaceful future for humanity. And that's what we've like left at the roadside for too long now. We got to get back on that, right? So thanks, folks. Thanks for being with us here today. AJ, I think that's like, we are now past the time we said we were going to wrap up. And we're going to invite you all to join us again next month, of course. Same time, same place. We're back on Instagram, end of November. And we invite all your questions, fill out that Google Doc sheet, get at us in different ways. But thanks so much for being here. Continue these conversations. Continue organizing with people in your community for justice and dignity for everyone. We encourage that. And as AJ said so importantly just a couple of minutes ago, like, you know, we do not need to choose between the options provided to us by our oppressors and exploiters. We certainly don't have to choose between different kinds of oppression that we're willing to endorse. We can and we must actually double down on our collective commitment to liberation and a liberation for all. So a free Palestine will mean like a freer Israel to a freer, you know, Palestinian people will mean freer Israelis. Like that, and a freer indigenous people in the territory called Turtle Island will mean I don't have to be a shitty settler colonizer anymore. So like, let's help each other out on this, okay? Thanks, folks. See you next month.